Today, we have the ultimate pleasure of being joined by Janet Cobb, CFRE and Bonterra fundraising coach. Janet's worked in the nonprofit space her entire career, and since becoming a consultant about a decade ago, has worked with upwards of 800 small to mid-sized organizations, ultimately helping them do more good. So we are fortunate to be joined by Janet and the wealth of knowledge that she has and will be sharing with us today. So we are in for a treat. But with that, Janet, I'll go ahead and pass it to you to get us kicked off.
Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. I do see that a handful of people are putting who they are and where they're from in the chat. So I invite all of you to do that. I am horrible at monitoring the chat to say, hey, Susie from South Carolina. I don't do that, but you can see who else is here without me announcing who you are. So thank you so much for being here and working to reimagine your annual report. Let's see how it goes, and we'll get to questions at the end, as Ashley said. So wherever you are, thank you for being here. Be sure to put a question in the chat if you have it, because if you're thinking it, there's probably 10 other people thinking it. So, don't hesitate. And if there is something critical that you need to have addressed before the end, make sure you put it in the chat so that Ashley can, take a look and interrupt me if need be to go over something. And, from time to time, my internet does weird things. So Ashley, if I freeze up or whatever, you'll let me know, I hope. Okay? So let's dig in and get started. The first thing we're going to talk about is why we need to reimagine our annual reports, thinking about sort of a then and now scenario. Then we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts, the must-haves of what needs to be in an annual report. Then we talk about how we can reimagine some of those things and how it can become a tool for engagement and fundraising throughout the year. So how we launch it and then what we do with it after the fact. So that's what we're going to cover today. I hope you feel like you're in the right place. If you've never done an annual report, this should give you some good tips and tricks for getting started. If you have done an annual report and you're looking to do it differently or expand how you use it, hopefully you'll get something out of this today as well. We're trying to cover the whole gamut so that everybody can walk away with a few things that are very helpful and implementable right away. All right, so here we go. Why reimagine? Well, we want to reimagine the annual report because previous decades, years of annual reports, they feel like you're carrying a stack of books. They're dense, they're heavy, they're loaded with lots of text and financial numbers and budgets and lists and all of that sort of thing. That isn't really an inviting, appealing way to engage donors. So they're often just kind of left on a shelf and seen as a static document, sort of a recap of the year that, doesn't really matter kind of thing. So today we'll explore, hopefully, a better way, a different way of thinking about this sort of what used to be sort of a magazine filled with content that people may or may not have engaged with. Also, traditionally, many people felt that the annual report was a very formal, business-like kind of document. It was technically, it's required to complete an annual report by law, but whether or not you distribute that annual report and make it an outward-facing document is another question. But because it was sort of a legal document, people thought they needed to take exactly what was in the legal reporting, the 990 and whatever you turned in, and make that exactly public facing. So it was business, it was lists, it was graphs, it was those sorts of things. Not very conversational, not very engaging. It was very much focused on the organization and what it did, the numbers you hit, the numbers of programs you had, the numbers of hours you were open, the number of people who came through the door, the number of graduates, the number of this, the number of that, the list of donors, right? From highest end donor to lowest end donor to anonymous donor, all the things in certain categories and tiers. It was just a lot. So what happens then when you do that kind of reporting is, one, they are logistical nightmares, because if you miss something, people could notice, right? If you misspell someone's name on a donor list, they notice. Because if you promise to list someone in your annual report when you ask them for a gift, and then you miss them, or you misspell their name, or you say Mr. and Mrs. when it is Mr. and Mr., or you say Mr. and Mrs. when they were divorced last year and you screwed up, like all of those things, they're just a nightmare, and they can be very exclusionary. Right? It leaves out the people. Often you list the donors, but you don't list the volunteers, right? And volunteers are giving of their time and their sweat and their tears and everything, and they're not listed anywhere. So there's an imbalance of gratitude kind of thing, or recognition. So that's the old. So what do we want to do? We want to create a well-crafted report that inspires engagement and giving, right? This is one touch point in the whole donor cultivation cycle, right? So in this touch point, you want to make sure that you are presenting material in a way that people can easily absorb, and that your tone is one that invites them to engage. So you want to start, always lead with the thank you. Now, this is true of all fundraising. When someone asks me, what's if, I'm limited in what I can do. I only have so much time. There's only one of me. My board doesn't help. I'm the only paid staff. I'm not a paid staff. I'm the founder and I have another full-time job and all of these things. If there's one thing I can do to improve my fundraising, what is it? It is thank you. Focus on your thank you. And that goes a long way to getting more support. So your annual report, which is kind of a summary of a year, should really focus on the thank you. That's why some people over the years have begun to call this a gratitude report instead of an annual report. Because when you lead with gratitude, people pay attention because you're thanking them. All right. So that deepens the connection to your organization right away. So that's thing one. Thing two is that you want to showcase real voices, right? Not just the board chair's voice, not just the executive director's voice. Those two are voices you can certainly include. You can have letters from the board chair and the executive director, or one or the other, even both. But you also want to make sure that you're sharing the stories in the voice of people who are benefiting from your programs, the donors, volunteers, community partners, anyone who is connected to your organization. If you can give them a perspective, if you can offer their perspective and share their voice of why your work matters in their world, right? That can go a long way, because people like to see what other people are saying. We know this because social media exists, right? The stuff that you find on social media is like, really? Someone thought that was important to share? And then you look and it had 5 million views, and it's like, what? Right? So your annual report, you want it to be that, right? You want it to be people sharing how they feel about the work you do and why it matters. You want to use, when you do have to give data, and you do, an annual report needs to have some data in it, right? You want to use infographics and charts and comparisons. You want to make your statistics easily digestible and compelling. So if you served, 36,000 meals, that's a big number and that's an important number, but you can also break that down so that it's more digestible, right? Each day we served 3 meals to 75 families. I don't know if that math adds up, but you get what I'm saying, right? You can have big numbers, but sometimes big numbers are overwhelming. So just like in your appeals, you want to break down the numbers to be more personable. You can also do that in your annual report. It's a both and, not an either or. You can have this at 36,000, but for some people, they need to know what that means on a day-to-day basis. So we served 3 meals a day to 75 families for, 12 months, 365 days of the year. That I can imagine. I have a harder time comprehending 36,000. Okay. So whatever you're doing, you want to make sure that a lot of your numbers are digestible. You can use percentages, you can use 1 in 4s and 2 in 7s, that kind of scenario. Infographics are helpful because they're visual, they're a number, and then there's a little bit of content. So it's not like reading paragraphs or lists and lists and lists. And then you want to do what you can to create interactive elements. In today's world, if our annual report is simply a printed document, we are missing the boat. We want to have it live somewhere online, so that people can look at videos, they can click onto certain data numbers, data points to get more information about that data point. You want to have microsites. You want to have a landing page connected to your website that is all about that is your annual report, right? You want a dynamic donor experience. Some people, believe me, they're going to look at the postcard you send and that is enough for them. Other people want to see sort of the magazine style. They want to flip pages and look at pictures. Other people want to dig deep into the fine print of your donor list or the fine print of your budget, and they want to know everything about your 990. You have to make it all available, but in different formats. It doesn't all have to come out in one thing, okay? You want to use clear layouts, large font, and make sure it is readable to all audiences, right? If you have too much fine print, and my apologies, we're working with some branding here. We have dark backgrounds with white print. That is not best to do in an annual report for donors. It makes it more difficult for people with visual imparities or limitations to absorb the content. So be careful on how you shade your pages, and those sorts of things. You want the annual report to be a point to strengthen relationships and inspire action and increase donor retention. You don't want it to just be past tense, right? You want it to be past tense, present tense, future tense, right? You want to talk about how what happened last year is going to continue next year in a new light because of the funding that was received or because of the funding that will be received, kind of thing. Because remember, again, we say This is one touch point in the ask, thank, report, impact, repeat cycle, right? The annual report is one piece. Every communication is part of that, right? So how are you making sure that the appreciation and the reporting impact are ongoing and the asks are inserted in between? The annual report is one of those pieces. I think about, I don't know how many of you are on Spotify, right? But I wasn't a Spotify user, I think probably until last year, maybe late 2023. I don't know, but I finally bought into it. Believe me, I have an iPod Touch that I have used for my music for walking and driving, right? And finally I gave in and I got Spotify. Well, at the end of the year, they did a recap, right? And that was a fun way for me to see my moods. And I remember distinctly it said October 29th, you listened to like 18 hours of music. Where did you find the time? And when I looked at that, it was because I was babysitting an infant and I was playing white noise baby lullabies the whole day for that infant, right? So what can you do in your annual report, in your reflection on the year, to create the playlist that brings up the memories of the donor's engagement? Right? It may not be a playlist of songs, but it could be a playlist of events. Now my phone gives me these memory reels or whatever, right? Like, how can we create those things that people are now used to from social media and all the things that, technology gives us? How can we share those moments with our donors when we are creating our annual report? Because when you do those things, a photo montage, you could create a playlist to recapture what happened through the year, right? This is how they're seeing their impact. This is how they're feeling more connected to you. They're more likely to give again and give in response to that annual report and even give more when they know that they have an emotional connection to the work being done. And that's what we can do now with technology in a way that we could not do with just a printed piece that is mailed in an envelope. So I'm going to reiterate the thank you. The, the entire whatever you produce, everything you produce at the time of the annual report should be with an appreciative tone, with gratitude, with appreciation for everyone who is involved, right? Some people are donors, some people are volunteers, some people are really invested volunteers like board members, some people are program participants, some people are family members of beneficiaries, some people are beneficiaries. If we don't have all of those elements and we aren't grateful for all of those elements, then we are missing something and our, table falls apart, right? Our mission doesn't happen without all of those elements. And so your annual report needs to show gratitude for all of that. Okay? Your annual report ideally embeds your strategic plan. Now, if you don't have a strategic plan, that's a thing that we can talk about on another day. We need to get you one, right? Because a strategic plan is where you articulate your vision, your mission, and your core values, and then create strategic goals to design a budget that reflects those core values and your strategic goals. Now, if you're operating in that way, then all of your communications and all of your fundraising efforts come out of that strategic plan. So your strategic plan drives your communication, and your communication drives your fundraising. If your communication plans and your fundraising plans, never the twain shall meet, if they don't speak to one another and they sit over here and the strategic plan sits up on a shelf, goals. Now, some strategic goals are multi-year, but you got to talk about the progress. That's why it's ongoing, right? Some goals have been met, right? And you talk in past tense, this was completed. Some goals are ongoing. And some goals you haven't even started yet because you needed to finish one thing before you could do the next thing, right? Somewhere in the way you present your annual report, this needs to be reflected. So when you share your financial numbers, your budget results, your income and expenses at a high level kind of thing, you can talk about how your strategic goals drove some of those expenses. You don't have to talk about every single one of them, but you can highlight some. I had an organization recently that in their strategic goals created an entirely new program, and they got funding for it and it went well, and then it started to not go well. And part of that was because they lost a major funding source for it. And part of that was because they realized they piloted it, but the numbers did not have enough of an impact to justify sustaining it. So their annual report this year has to tell that story. And the budget numbers clearly do, because they lost that significant funding for that program. So they pulled that out and highlighted it when they were talking about the financials and how they needed to switch their strategic priorities based on the evidence that they gained. It doesn't mean it failed. You can't hide your failures, right? These things are lessons learned. Your budget reflects it, your programs reflect it, your annual report has to reflect it. Okay? Then you want to make sure that you are including the power of story, right? You want to tell a compelling story that makes your work relatable and strengthens the emotional tie. When someone tells a story, people remember what they're trying to share more than if they are writing a report, right? So how are you connecting your reports, your impact reports, your financial reports, to the stories that of the people being impacted or of the people driving impact? What are your staff stories? What are your volunteer stories? What are your other donor stories? Those are all important stories. And, I struggle even with the word storytelling, because we shouldn't be storytelling, we should be story showing, right? We want to bring people in so that they are watching and feeling and witnessing what is happening. And that happens through the power of narrative, right? So it's like a good movie or a good television series or a good novel. You get drawn into it because there are people, things are happening to people, people are making choices, but those things that are happening and those choices they are making relate to me, right? It is making universal truths personal and personal experiences universal. And that's what you want to do with your annual report as well. Donors don't want corporate heady reports. And you don't really want to give those, because when you keep it all very much in your head instead of in your heart, it gives people reason to question and argue, and right, statistics make people argue more than they make people feel and act. So how are you, we're not talking, this doesn't have to be trauma porn, it doesn't have to be insensitive to any group of people you might be working with. It just needs to be centered in people, right? It doesn't have to break HIPAA. It doesn't have to do any of those things that I hear a lot of concerns about. But we know from the power of GoFundMe, where people go on and they tell their personal story. They don't have a 501c3. They don't give tax credits. They don't have credibility at all. They don't have websites. They don't have anything. They tell a story and people pour money into GoFundMe projects. Same happens on Kickstarter and Indiegogo and all of these other places where people tell their story. People who want to produce a film tell a story about why the film's important, and people throw money at them, right? Like there's all kinds of instances that tell us corporate speak and business language is not what drives action, because giving my money away is an emotional action. And so a story is what is going to drive that. And a story rooted in gratitude for those who give to make that story happen is even more powerful, because it proves that the gifts that are given matter. So what can you use? You can use all kinds of tools and platforms to create these. This particular document is a one-page annual report that one of my clients produced and distributed a few years back, right? It's simple, it's colorful, it matches very much the aesthetic that they have in their office and in all of their communications, right? It gives numbers, it gives photos. It doesn't tell stories in the way a longer document would, right? But it does what it can in a very simple, easily digestible manner, right? I believe they created this in Canva. You can use Adobe Spark if you are into the Adobe tool sets, Creative Suite. But Canva has all kinds of great stuff now. There are all kinds of other DIY tools to help you create these kinds of infographics that you might use inside of a page, right? If you're sending things off to a designer, you can create some things or give them samples of what you want before you send it off. That saves a lot of back and forth. You can also use digital flipbook platforms. Flip HTML5 and I don't know how to say this, issue, ISSUU. These two platforms help you create like an online magazine so people feel like they're turning pages. That's a great tool, right? You can use the carousels that you can do in Canva. Like there's all kinds of things now that you can do, even for like a modified print version if you're not doing videos or playlists or things like that. You also want to begin using Google Analytics or Bitly to make things more accessible. Google Analytics helps you track engagement. Bitly helps you shorten some of the URLs you might be using for creating some of these materials. All of these things can be very useful. You can use some other sources are like Outgrow or Typeform that help you create. Typeform helps you create surveys or quizzes. Outgrow helps you create online types of quizzes. You know how you see those things in social media? What type of what Harry Potter house do you belong to? What type of, I don't know, hook are you? What type of whatever, right? There's all these quizzes. You can create these quizzes to get people engaged that then lead to your annual report, right? So you might be gathering people who otherwise wouldn't know who you are, who otherwise aren't following you. You boost the quiz on social media and you might find some new followers, right? So look into all of the tools. Sketch Wow is another one that you can create animated sketches from your content that can be more engaging. Instead of a PowerPoint, you could use a Prezi, right? Like we just want to stop thinking about an annual report as a book, okay? A magazine. This is an example of one organization's annual report that I received. Too much text, too fine print, too much talking about the organization, right? I tried to block out any identifying content. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but you want to avoid this kind of presentation. You want to avoid this kind of presentation in your annual report, and you want to avoid this kind of presentation in any appeals or anything you send out, right? You want less text, larger print, and not focusing on your organization too much, but focusing on the relationship of the donor to the impact and the outcome. So remember that donors give through your organization to a cause they care about, to create the world that they want to see, that they envision. They don't give to your organization just because you're the organization. Because even more so today, in today's world, today's younger donors especially, they are very cause-driven, much less organization-driven. So if an organization doesn't treat them the way they want to be treated, or doesn't send them the right, a thank you or some type of ongoing engagement to report impact, if they don't know what their money's doing, they go and find another organization that's doing it instead. They don't try to make you do what they think you should do anyway, right? So you want the organization to shrink into the background. You are the conduit through which the donor creates good in the world. And they'll find another conduit if you focus too much on yourself and you're kind of narcissistic in that way. This is an example from 2017, but I keep this in my pack of examples because I was so impressed when this organization did this. This organization was a very small, I think, 2-person organization, and I'm not even sure they were both full-time. There was the founder, and then there was one person who I believe was paid part-time. I don't think the founder was even paid. So small organization, very young. They had just started about a year earlier, and they created an annual report. And this was the cover of the annual report. Is that not engaging? Does that not grab you? Now, this is a PowerPoint deck, right? This isn't they turn the PowerPoint deck into a printable kind of magazine, right? But we are starting strong together. They knew they were young and scrappy, but they wanted to show what they could do together. And then this whole document, it was about 16 slides. I just want to highlight a few of what they did. So one of the slides was this picture on the left, right? It is, thank you to the foundation for your donation of solar lights to the victims of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. This was a letter from a recipient of solar lights, right? Shows her picture, shows a quick thank you. Then they had like 4 or 5 pages of people who had received something from them saying thank you. Okay. Then they had these high-level numbers, right? Through the DNA initiative, that's what it hadn't, it didn't have anything to do with DNA sampling, blood sampling. That was just the acronym for their initiative, right? It was a farming initiative or gardening initiative. They harvested 48 CSA baskets filled with 100% organic produce capable of feeding 48 families for a week. Now, those numbers aren't earth-shattering. They distributed 48 baskets. That's not earth-shattering, but their whole focus was strengthening their local community. They're a little tiny suburb of LA, and 48 families were fed these baskets, which would not have received them before, and they were proud of that. And that should be something they're proud of. And they put it out there. They put out that they helped stretch hurricane relief dollars, right? They distributed 155 units of solar lamps to victims affected by Hurricane Katrina. They successfully connected 9 families to other services. Not earth-shattering numbers, but you know what they did? They took this nicely designed, simple PowerPoint, turned it into a little booklet, and then they attended the city council, the local city council meeting, and they distributed it to all the city council members and everybody who was at the meeting. And that opened doors that were unimaginable otherwise, right? Had they not gone that extra step to distribute these at the city council meeting, they wouldn't have gotten the attention. But this simple annual report opened doors of opportunity. It brought in new volunteers. It brought in new donations. And their little tiny scrappy organization catapulted to an entirely new level the following year. I included some examples of some well done, different kinds of annual reports here. There's one that shows a dashboard. There's one that is embedded in their website. There's another one that is an online magazine through Issue. And then there's a downloadable PDF. So these are examples of how different organizations did these things. You can look them up. I'm not going to go into them here. We don't have the time for that. But I wanted to give you examples of different styles, okay? Then once you have what you're going to communicate, then you have to talk about format and distribution, okay? So what does that look like? I've talked about this already. Ask, thank, report, impact, repeat. It is one point in your total relationship building program. It needs to tell a compelling story. All right. These are the ways you can do it. Omni-channel. You can have a gathering to share, like a State of the Union kind of gathering where you invite people to come, you share highlights, you have a few snacks, you all celebrate the impact. You can share it in a series of social media posts. You can have quizzes that I mentioned. You can do an email series. You can do an email saying, hey, it's launched live on our website. Here's the link. You can do print and mail materials. You can send a full document to the higher end, more invested donors. You can send a postcard with a QR code to less invested people, to non-donors if you want. You can have videos that share the highlights. You want to think of all the ways that you are getting this annual report out. So what will you do? Will you host an event? Will you present a live stream or a webinar? Will you mail the entire report? Only you can decide, and you may not be able to do all of these things all in one year, but now you have a list of ways you can distribute and share and repurpose this annual report to reach more people. You want to also think about, once it's done, once it's launched, once it's shared, when will you use it again? Don't let it just sit and die on the table. When you go to write emails to folks, you can take some of those stories and some of those statistics and retell them and share a mid-year. You can create a mid-year like lead magnet to get more people on your email list. You can share it at farmers markets. You can put it in libraries, right? You can spread it around in ways that will draw new people, not just report out to people already giving to you what their impact was. I do highly recommend that you offer some sort of a live something when you uh, produce your annual report. You can gather a small group of people, you can do an online chat, you can offer a series of small gatherings, but in some way make it come to life a little bit as a donor appreciation. So I'm not talking about a special event where you're selling tickets and having an auction and doing raffles and having, rubbery chicken dinners. I'm talking about a simple sort of gathering just to show donor appreciation, not to ask for money. To do this, you want to make sure that you are segmenting your audience, thinking about who needs to get what type of communication, what type of annual report document. The 85-year-old retired person who has been giving to your organization for 25 years does not necessarily need the same approach as the 30-something-year-old person who gave you $20 when you set up a table at the farmers market. Two completely different audiences needing completely different things. So think about that. Post key takeaways on social media. Do the impact, take the infographic that you put in the actual magazine that you sent to your very invested people to, break it up and put them out on social media. Use the report to do video summaries of different parts of it. Repurpose it all year. And then make sure that you are surveying donors to learn how they value the report. Did they read it? Did they like it? Did they miss something? Were they hoping for something that you didn't get? Are you on target? Make sure you follow up with donors to find out what impact the annual report had so you know how to adjust next time. And if you can track interaction through views and shares and donations and surveys, that's even better. You don't want to just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again without knowing what impact it's having. All right, so that is all I have. We have 15 minutes for Q&A if we have any. I wanted to make sure there was plenty of time for that. Should I stop my share?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
feel free.
stop my
You can cut
share.
your
Okay.
share, Janet. Perfect. Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and transition to Q&A. Janet, thanks so much for all of the helpful information. But before we transition to Q&A, really quickly, folks, if you are interested in learning more about Bonterra and some of our tools and services, and more specifically how our tools can help you kind of compile the data needed for your annual report and help you create those. I'm going to launch another quick poll here. Again, feel free to fill that out, and we will have one of our colleagues reach out to you after we wrap up today. But while folks are filling that out, I'll go ahead and get us kicked off here with Q&A. One of the first questions that I saw come in comes from Jamie. Jamie asked if people do actually use their annual reports as a way to target new donor prospects. It's always been one of their fears, but and also an opportunity to bring into more of our mission. Would love your thoughts, Janet, on that.
Um, do they? Yes. Is it a good idea? Yes. Do you want to do it in particular ways? Yes, right? But it's a public document, so the more you can share it with non-donors and use it as a tool if you're meeting someone new, the better, right? Because it's already been produced. You don't have to, I mean, in essence, it's a great case for support. Look at all the good work we've done. With your money, we can do more, right? So definitely share it with potential foundation funders, donor advised fund holders. That's a big rising trend. The DAFs you may have heard about, donor advised funds. Share it with the people who manage those so they can share it with the people who are setting up those donor advised funds. So yes, I definitely would say, put it in dentist office and libraries and coffee shops, wherever you can, to potentially attract new folks. It's a good way to use it. So.
Awesome. There was a lot of questions that came in kind of talking about the sweet spot for like the length of your annual report. If you don't mind sharing, yeah, in terms of like presentation, how many slides, or if it's a magazine, how many pages? What do you think is that sweet spot, Janet?
So um, you're not going to like my answer. There's no such thing. It really does depend on how much your organization is doing, how much it has to say, right? So you don't want it to be artificially short if you're doing a ton of stuff, right? But you also don't want it to be artificially long if you're a younger, smaller, less, robust. And being younger and smaller and less robust is not a bad thing. The organization that I showed you those few slides had I believe it was a 12-page PowerPoint. They were a year old and they were serving a really tiny town in Southern California. Will they ever be a massive organization? No, because their sole purpose is to serve the little tiny town. So they'll always probably have an annual report between 12 and 16 pages because of the way they design it. I work with an organization in Massachusetts who just produced a 12-page compilation of infographics. Now, they'll be able to use those 12 infographics separately, but they pulled it together as their annual report. Some people, and I'm seeing in the chat, I was kind of looking in the chat when that poll was up, some people use a 4-page report. You saw the 1-page report I showed you, right? You always have to ask the question, how much do we have to share? How are we sharing it? And what is the cost benefit analysis? If you're printing it and mailing it, it needs to be shorter and less and not as heavy. Have more content in digital formats so that people can find more if they want. So it does depend on how you're distributing it, what you're doing with it.
Right, definitely makes sense, Janet. And on that same theme, I've seen a couple of questions in the Q&A, also in the chat, about timing. When is the best time to send out your annual report? Is it, sometimes it feels like it takes so long to compile it that they're getting it out in like June, but, is that ideal, or is it first month, 2 months? If you don't mind sharing kind of what are your thoughts and experience on that.
So it does depend on when your fiscal year ends, depending on how you're presenting. So some people, whether their fiscal year ends on December 31st or not, share an annual calendar year report, right? The technical annual report is comes out of the 990 and what needs to be submitted, by IRS and state regulations, right? Every organization needs to file a state annual report, which is just like a 1 or 2 page document, right? So a lot of people do it after that and they wait for audited results. But you can present your annual report without audited results as long as you're clear that these are not audited financial results. Okay, so you can do a calendar year because that's how most people's worlds work when they think of an annual report. You could do fiscal year. You say that it's your fiscal year, your finances reflect that, right? So there is no right or wrong. You just want to be consistent and you want to be clear as to what time frame you're reporting on.
Absolutely. We had a question come in from Chelsea, and Chelsea asked, where would you place like special stories, special impact stories about maybe donations, for example, to your organization? Where would you place that in an annual report? Do you think that that's better suited for the beginning, the end, kind of in the middle? What are your thoughts on that?
So if it's going to sort of be data heavy, I like to stick data in the middle because people tend to look at things, print material, they flip from the front or from the back. I mean, there's studies that show this. Some people start opening magazines from the back end, other people from the front end, right? So you want the stuff that's going to grab them, the thank you, the gratitude, the appreciation, the smiling faces in the front and back, and you want the more lists and things stuck in the middle. Now, that is not how a lot of people design their annual reports. A lot of people put the finances in the back because it's the most boring, but you got to realize some people start their perusing from the back, right? I just saw someone put something about Flip Snack. Is that that must be another online magazine in the chat. Be sure you're looking at the chat. There's a lot of people sharing their annual reports. If you look at all of these, you'll see there is no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong. It's just how you can best engage your donors.
Yes, great call out, Janet. The chat has been going off pretty much the entire presentation with so many people collaborating and going back and forth, which we love to see. It makes for such an incredible session, not only for the information you're getting from Janet, but the information you're hearing from your peers and your organization similar to yours. So definitely feel free to look back into the chat and look at all that's going on in there. We had a question. Uh-huh.
Ashley, before you go to the next question, I did notice a question about donor tribute. And I assume that means lists of donors. Those are going out of style for sure because of many of the things that I suggest, I said earlier. Logistically, they're nightmares. You miss somebody, you misspell, you miss gender, whatever it is, right? And also because it overemphasizes power plays for higher donors get more recognition than lower donors. So every organization has to think about what they want to do and what is the anticipation and expectation and how many years it might take you to adjust. So sorry. Question, Ashley.
No, that was the question that I was going to point out. So it was all
Good.
good. Denise had a question on whether or not you feel it's necessary to have a letter from maybe like the CEO or the board president, the executive director. Do you feel like that's necessary and needed for an annual report, or is that kind of antiquated as well?
I think there needs to be some letter from a leader, but it needs to be profusely appreciative. Again, conversational, heartfelt. Yeah.
Perfect. We had a question come in from Angie. Angie asked, "What kind of what are your thoughts, or what do you feel about using the annual report as a fundraising piece, aka like newsletters, converting those maybe to fundraising pieces? What are your thoughts on that?"
These are all fundraising pieces. What that means different things to different people. Sometimes people send out the annual report and they get loads of donations back. Do you put an envelope in your annual report? Some people say yes, some people say no. you can only decide. Some organizations use the annual report as the lead up to their annual major ask, either at year end or, on their regional giving day, right? Um, it is one touch point in the donor cultivation cycle. So it is all about fundraising, right? Can you take pieces of it and include it in appeals? Yes, you can. Remember, an appeal, though, the fundamental difference between a gratitude report or an impact report or, sharing success stories is that a fundraising appeal is an unfinished story of need that the donor can make a difference by making a gift. The annual report is more of the report impact section of that cycle.
Right, definitely makes sense. Very insightful here. Looks like we're coming close to time here. Probably have time for maybe one other question. But Janet, I saw this in the chat earlier, and I know it kind of sparked some conversation within the chat, but would love to hear from you on kind of what methods do you recommend organizations use to document these real stories throughout the year? Because I think it can be difficult kind of going in December thinking about what you did in March, for example. So how do you kind of approach making sure that you document this so that at the time for annual report, it's nice of you.
I think you froze up a little, Ashley, so I'm going to jump in. If you have a Google Doc, a Google Drive, a Dropbox, wherever folks can access what is happening in real time and drop in their stories, there is a platform that allows you to collect stories. I hope you all are hearing me. Can someone put in the chat whether or not you're still hearing me? Because Ashley froze. Are you all hearing me? Yes, good. Okay. So, what is it called now? Monkey. Oh, I can't remember the name of it now. Not Survey Monkey. It's Memory Fox. Memory Fox. Memory Fox allows you to. It's a platform that allows you to capture videos from people by sending out links to them. It does cost. It's a platform that costs some money, but it's not super expensive. It's designed specifically for nonprofits. So, whatever receptacle you can use to encourage your staff people to drop stories in as they happen. Your development people definitely should be, gathering stories year round. Post event, you can be, reaching out to people. You always want to be thinking of where you can get the freshest stories, right? So when an art program ends, have people, fill out an exit survey, right? When anything happens, any program event, make sure you're doing everything you can to capture memories while they're fresh. Give staff designated time to sit down and share the stories. Don't expect them to do it on their own time. Don't expect board members to do things on their own time. If they are busy people, you give them time inside the board meeting, inside a staff meeting. The staff meeting probably could have been an email. So instead, gather to just write down stories of positive things that have happened, right? And have a receptacle, Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, whatever it is. Thank you all so much for your time and your attention. I hope that this was helpful. Please let us know, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Take care.